Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 138. Godha-Jātaka. With matted hair. This story was told by the boaster while at Jetavana monastery, about a hypocrite. The incidents were like those above explained. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was born a lizard. And in a but hard by a village on the borders there lived a rigid ascetic who had attained the 5 knowledges, and was treated with great respect by the villagers. In an ant hill at the end of the walk where the hermit paced up and down, lived the Bodhisattva, and twice or thrice each day he would go to the hermit and hear words of the righteous path and holiness. Then with due reverence to the good man, the Bodhisattva would depart to his own dwelling. After a certain time the ascetic said farewell to the villagers and went away. In his stead there came another ascetic, a rascally fellow, to dwell in the hermitage. Assuming the holiness of the newcomer, the Bodhisattva acted towards him as to the first ascetic. One day an unexpected storm in the dry season brought out the ants on their hills, and the lizards, coming abroad to eat them, were caught in great numbers by the village folk. And some were served up with vinegar and sugar for the ascetic to eat. Pleased with so tasty a dish, he asked what it was, and learned that it was a dish of lizards. On this he thought that he had a remarkably fine lizard as his neighbor, and resolved to dine off him. Accordingly he made ready the pot for cooking and sauce to serve the lizard in, and sat at the door of his hut with a club hidden under his yellow robe, awaiting the Bodhisattva's coming, with a studied air of perfect peace. At evening the Bodhisattva came, and as he came near, noticed that the hermit did not seem quite the same, but had a look about him that predicted no good. Snuffing up the wind which was blowing towards him from the hermit's cell, the Bodhisattva smelt the smell of lizard's flesh, and at once realized how the taste of lizard had made the ascetic want to kill him with a club and eat him up. So he retired homeward without calling on the ascetic. Seeing that the Bodhisattva did not come, the ascetic judged that the lizard must have foreseen his plot, but marveled how he could have discovered it. Determined that the lizard should not escape, he brought out the club and threw it, just hitting the tip of the lizard's tail. Quick as thought the Bodhisattva rushed into his refuge, and putting his head out by a different hole to that by which he had gone in, cried, "Rascally hypocrite, your garb of piety led me to trust you, but now I know your villainous nature. What has a thief like you to do with hermit's clothing?" Thus scolding the false ascetic, the Bodhisattva recited this stanza. With matted hair and garb of skin, why follow the ascetic's piety? A saint without, your heart within is choked with foul impurity. In this wise did the Bodhisattva expose the wicked ascetic, after which he retired into his ant hill. And the wicked ascetic departed from that place. His lesson ended. The master identified the birth by saying, "The hypocrite was the wicked ascetic of those days, Sariputra the good ascetic who lived in the hermitage before him, and I myself the lizard." Source: adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 139. Ubhatobhaṭṭa-Jātaka. His blinding and her beating. This story the master told while at the bamboo grove, about Devadatta. We hear that the brethren, meeting together in the hall of truth, spoke one with another, saying that even as a torch from a pyre, charred at both ends and bedunged in the middle, does not serve as wood either in forestry or village hearth, so Devadatta, by giving up the world to follow this exceptional faith, had only achieved a 2 times shortcoming and failure. Seeing that he had missed the comforts of lay life yet had fallen short of his learning as a brother. Entering the hall, the master asked and was told what the brethren were talking of together. "Yes, brethren," said he, "and so too in days gone by Devadatta came to just such another 2 times failure." So saying, he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was born a tree fairy, and there was a certain village where line fishermen lived in those days. And one of these fishermen, taking his tackle, went off with his little boy, and cast his hook into the most likely waters known to his fellow fishermen. Now a snag caught his hook and the fisherman could not pull it up. "What a fine fish," thought he. "I'd better send my boy off home to my wife and tell her to get up a quarrel and keep the others at home, so that there'll be none to want to go shares in my prize." Accordingly he told the boy to run off home and tell his mother what a big fish he had hooked and how she was to engage the neighbor's attention. Then, fearing his line might break, he threw off his coat and rushed into the water to secure his prize. But as he groped about for the fish, he struck against the snag and put out both his eyes. Moreover, a robber stole his clothes from the bank. In an agony of pain, with his hands pressed to his blinded eyes, he clambered out trembling in every limb and tried to find his clothes. Meantime his wife, to occupy the neighbors by a quarrel on purpose, had tricked herself out with a palm leaf behind one ear, and had blacked one eye with soot from the saucepan. In this guise, nursing a dog, she came out to call on her neighbors. "Bless me, you've gone mad," said one woman to her. "Not mad at all," retorted the fisherman's wife. "You abuse me without cause with your slanderous tongue. Come your ways with me to the zamindar and I'll have you fined 8 pieces for slander." So with angry words they went off to the zamindar. But when the matter was gone into, it was the fisherman's wife who was fined. And she was tied up and beaten to make her pay the fine. Now when the tree fairy saw how misfortune had happened to both the wife in the village and the husband in the forest, he stood in the fork of his tree and exclaimed, "Ah, fisherman, both in the water and on land your labor is in vain, and 2 times is your failure." So saying he uttered this stanza. His blinding, and her beating, clearly show a 2 times failure and a 2 times suffering. His lesson ended, the master identified the birth by saying, "Devadatta was the fisherman of those days, and I the tree fairy." Source: adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 140. Kāka-Jātaka. In ceaseless dread. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about a sagacious advisor. The incidents will be told in the 12th book in connection with the Bardasala-Jataka. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was born a crow. One day the king's priest went out from the city to the river, bathed there, and having perfumed and garlanded himself, wore his bravest dress and came back to the city. On the archway of the city gate there sat 2 crows. And one of them said to his mate, "I mean to foul this Brahman's head." "Oh, don't do any such thing," said the other. "For this Brahman is a great man, and it is an evil thing to incur the hatred of the great. If you anger him, he may destroy the whole of our kind." "I really must," said the first. "Very well, you're sure to be found out," said the other, and flew quickly away. Just when the Brahman was under the battlements, down dropped the filth upon him as if the crow were dropping a festoon. The enraged Brahman then conceived hatred against all crows. Now at this time it was by chance that a female slave in charge of a granary spread the rice out in the sun at the granary door and was sitting there to watch it, when she fell asleep. Just then up came a shaggy goat and fell to eating the rice till the girl woke up and drove it away. Twice or 3 times the goat came back, as soon as she fell asleep, and ate the rice. So when she had driven the creature away for the 3rd time, she thought that continued visits of the goat would consume half her store of rice, and that steps must be taken to scare the animal away for good and so save her from so great a loss. So she took a lighted torch, and, sitting down, pretended to fall asleep as usual. And when the goat was eating, she suddenly sprang up and hit its shaggy back with her torch. At once the goat's shaggy hide was all on fire, and to ease its pain, it rushed into a hay shed near the elephant's stable and rolled in the hay. So the shed caught fire and the flames spread to the stables. As these stables caught fire, the elephants began to suffer, and many of them were badly burnt beyond the skill of the elephant doctors to cure. When this was reported to the king, he asked his priest whether he knew what would cure the elephants. "Certainly I do, sire," said the priest, and being pressed to explain, said his nostrum was crow's fat. Then the king ordered crows to be killed and their fat taken. And then there was a great slaughter of crows, but never was any fat found on them, and so they went on killing till dead crows lay in heaps everywhere. And a great fear was upon all crows. Now in those days the Bodhisattva had his living in a great cemetery, at the head of 80,000 crows. One of these brought news to him of the fear that was upon the crows. And the Bodhisattva, feeling that there was none but him who could work on the task, resolved to free his family from their great dread. Reviewing the 10 perfections, and selecting from that kindness as his guide, he flew without stopping right up to the king's palace, and entering in at the open window descended underneath the king's throne. Straightway a servant tried to catch the bird, but the king entering the chamber escaped him. Recovering himself in a moment, the great being, remembering kindness, came on from beneath the king's throne and spoke thus to the king. "Sire, a king should remember the maxim that kings should not walk according to lust and other evil passions in ruling their kingdoms. Before taking action, it is right first to examine and know the whole matter, and then only to do that which being done is salutary. If kings do that which being done is not salutary, they fill thousands with a great fear, even the fear of death. And in prescribing crow's fat, your priest was prompted by revenge to lie. For crows have no fat." By these words the king's heart was won. And he asked the Bodhisattva to be seated on a throne of gold, and there anointed beneath the wings with the choicest oils, and served in vessels of gold with the king's own meats and drink. Then when the great being was filled and at ease, the king said, "Sage, you say that crows have no fat. How comes it that they have none?" "In this wise," answered the Bodhisattva with a voice that filled the whole palace, and he proclaimed the truth in this stanza. In ceaseless dread, with all mankind for enemies, their life is past, and hence no fat have crows. This explanation given, the great being taught the king, saying, "Sire, kings should never act without examining and knowing the whole matter." Well pleased, the king laid his kingdom at the Bodhisattva's feet, but the Bodhisattva restored it to the king, whom he established in the 5 rules, beseeching him to shield all living creatures from harm. And the king was moved by these words to grant immunity to all living creatures, and in particular he was unceasingly generous to crows. Every day he had 6 bushels of rice cooked for them and delicately flavored, and this was given to the crows. But to the great being there was given food such as the being alone ate. His lesson ended, the master identified the birth by saying, "Ananda was king of Benares in those days,